Hey everyone, and welcome to Liquid Liner Notes, a podcast that brings you conversations from the beverage and music industries. I'm your host, Danny, aka Hip Hops on Instagram. Today's guest was born and raised in Fairfield, Connecticut. He moved to Chicago to attend music school at DePaul University, where he played jazz guitar and graduated with a bachelor's of music in performing arts management and a minor in business administration. He then worked in craft beverage retail at Binny's and West Lakeview Liquors. In 2012, he joined Pipeworks, an upstart brewery at the time, as an unpaid intern. Over time, he became a managing partner, oversaw daily operations, recipe development, and headed their barrel program, earning the title Master of Barrels. In 2019, after a sip of inspiration regenerated his passion for craft beer, he left Pipeworks to start his own brewery, creating simple complexities in liquid form. He's one half of the Dust Brothers and co-founder of Dustcoin. He also co-hosts the Beer Temple podcast, the co-founder and head brewer of Is Was Brewing, Mike Schallau.
Hey, that's a nice introduction there.
I had to give you a Mike Schallau-esque introduction. I don't do that for everybody, and I won't be doing that for anybody else. So thank you for taking the time to sit down with me. I just wanted to, you're one of my favorite breweries in Chicago, and I
thank you.
Sort of love the view of beer that you have, like listening to you on the podcast and everything like that. I feel like I agree with you on a lot of things, and so it's just you're one of the first people I wanted to have on the podcast.
Awesome. Glad we finally made it work. I know that took some time back and forth to get it going.
All right, and how did you originally get into craft beer?
So when I was at DePaul, I think about my senior year, they changed everyone's schedules so that no one had classes on Fridays. Like every year, did Monday through Thursdays, and it was about the same time Half Acre was opening up the bottle shop there. And I lived in Lincoln Park, and there used to be a Lincoln bus. And so I could take the bus door to door from, like, I would walk out my apartment, get on the bus, and then walk off and just walk right into Half Acre. And I had a friend who knew someone who was working there, so we started going there every Friday, getting whatever the newest release was, getting growlers of the newest release. Just got really into it that way. I started home brewing in college, too. And then I was a terrible home brewer, though. I did not have the patience or, like, skill at the time to make anything that I actually enjoyed. So I ended up with a lot of bottles in the corner of the dining room being like, I guess those are going to sit there for a couple of years.
Were those, like, the Mr. Beer kits with the...
It started as, like, there was, like, a Cooper's kit, which was, like, this Australian brewery that made a kit where you just, like, diluted the hop malt extract and fermented it. And that was the first thing we did. But then that was the only one I did that wasn't, like, whole grain. So right after that, we started doing whole grain, even though we sucked at it.
And were you doing, what styles were you kind of doing? Just like the traditional?
It was a lot of low ABV pale ales, like sub 5%, like kind of hoppy beers, and then saisons. There's a lot of saisons, but just like single strain of yeast that you get out of a slap pack at Brew and Grow. Mostly because that's when I learned that, like, if you don't have temperature control, you can just, like, let those rip, and you'll still turn out with something good. And then I started working at West Lakeview Liquors out of school, and that was one of the few places that had, like, a really insane beer selection of, like, import beer, but, like, craft import beer, not just, like, St. Pauli girl kind of stuff, but, like, they had a bunch of McKellar and Cantillon and Drie Fontaine and Blaugy, things like small breweries, but from Europe mostly, and then all over the world. Got really into it there, and I worked mostly day shifts. So when the guys who started Pipeworks, they had met working at the same store, and so I would receive all the deliveries, and I got to know them. And one day I had a day off, and I just wandered into their brewery and started volunteering for free. And I was there for a long time.
Yeah, and Pipeworks was. Just as a little backstory, they did like the whole Kickstarter and sort of built from there, and now they're probably one of the larger independent breweries.
Yeah, definitely. They were, I don't know how other breweries have grown or what their volume's at anymore, but they were like top 3 or 4 in the state for volume of independent craft breweries.
Yeah, and so I guess you started doing some recipe development there, and was that just like a continuation of sort of like your interest from home brewing, or is that
so like I just oversaw that more out of necessity. I didn't write all the recipes by any means. We had this kind of very collaborative process where we knew we had to make a lot of beers every month because that kind of became the thing that we became known for, and we would all, literally everyone in the company would sit down in one big meeting at the beginning of the month and you would throw out ideas. Everyone was invited, and any idea was welcome. And then we kind of would whittle it down to like, is that even possible? Like, can we make that a thing? Mm-hmm. Is that like and then that was before, is it a good idea? So there would be like succession of meetings in from week to week of any idea. Can we actually make it? Do we think it'll actually be good? And then like, is there some sort of like hook, for lack of a better term, of like that would make people like think about it and attach themselves to it a little bit? And is there a way we can like a name or a label or an imagery that we can attach to this thing that we think would be a good tasting beer?
Yeah, you guys, I feel like you guys in the Chicago market at least were for sure like one of the first IPAs with a new fruit addition. Yeah. You know, every week with the fish series. I'm blanking on what the term of it was. You guys.
We just called it the fish series.
The fish series. And then a lot of cocktail inspired beers.
Yeah.
Was I know, like I remember, shaken and stirred or brown stirred, whatever it was. Yeah.
Brown stirred.
Hey Careful Man was yours.
Man. Yeah, that was the first cocktail inspired thing we did, and that was like before that was really a thing. So we were just big fans of other alcoholic beverages as well, and we're like, well, can we get those flavors into this beer using like, natural ingredients? Yeah. And like the concepts were fun, like it was very thoughtful at the time. And then the fruit IPAs started because we made a collaboration with Tired Hands. And they were big on putting lime in IPAs. And we're like, well, that's cool. The hops have all sorts of fruit flavors. So what if we underscored these different hops with different fruit flavors? Yeah. And so
and a little foreshadowing of what yeast would do with fruit additions for later. Yeah. I moved to Chicago in 2012, and that was sort of, I feel like Pipeworks was like really starting to take off then. Yeah. It seemed like, and it was all it's like a stamp in time for me. Like,
sure.
That like. Being excited about craft beer and chasing the large format bottles everywhere, and that was when everything was in bombers, which was
it was a
wild.
Different time. There were like 6 breweries in the entire city of Chicago at that point, which I sound like an old person saying that, but wasn't that long ago.
No, and I think that's probably why I didn't really start getting heavy into craft beer. I mean, I had Cigar City down in Tampa, but I didn't start getting heavy into it until I moved here. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's probably why I think I mostly agree with your take and like your vision of it, because I feel like we probably sort of came up in the same era.
For sure.
And then, so tell me, so you decided Pipeworks wasn't really your thing anymore. You kind of fell out of love with beer.
I mean, we made so many beers so quickly, and there was so much of that creative process of like coming up with new stuff that I just kind of burnt out on that as a thing. And then once I did that, I kind of started realizing like I didn't personally really enjoy a lot of the things that we were making. Not that they were bad by any means. They were actually like excellent technical beers and like experiments and creative like projects, but I just didn't really want to drink them. Yeah. And so I went to Beer Temple one day, and they had La Vermontois on, which is a beer from a brewery called Blaugy, it's on like the French-Belgian border. And I had it, and I remembered like it was you got like transported back to like when I started really getting into beer, because that was one of the beers I would drink all the time at West Lakeview, and I hadn't had it in 5-6 years. And I was like, oh, this is why you originally got really into this. Like, you wanted to make things like this. And I knew we were never going to make that at Pipeworks. And I felt like I had kind of done everything I could do and added everything I could add to Pipeworks at that point. There was not going to be a lot more upward trajectory for me that I saw there. Yeah. So those two things coming together, I just decided to leave and start my own thing on good terms. We still get along.
I was gonna say you don't have to. If there's anything you don't want to answer, that's totally fine. But I was gonna say, were you kind of like looking for an out, and then you had that beer, and you were like, you know what, I think I want to do my own thing, or were you already thinking you wanted to do your own thing, and that sort of like gave you the push?
Yeah, it all kind of. I'm sure one existed before the other. I probably was like starting to think about like what else do I actually want to do, or like, what would make me like happy in doing this, or in anything. Like honestly, there are times where I'd be like, well, I'll just leave beer. But having that beer, it's like, well, no one was really making that beer, those saisons like that, and I thought there was something I could add there. There had been so many breweries that had sprung up since I started working at Pipeworks that did things similar to Pipeworks, so much of that space was full of good, really good beers that I'm like, I don't have much to add to that anymore.
Yeah.
But I probably was like starting to think about like it's really important for me to feel like I'm improving and feel like I'm like moving forward in my life.
Yeah.
I think it's for a lot of people, but like if I don't feel like I get like really distraught, and so I probably was thinking about I need new challenges. Honestly, one of the things when I quit was like I want answers. I want to have to find answers to questions that I can't just Google, because like a lot of things like you can just Google them and figure them out. But doing something very specific and something very unique to what like how we're doing it now. Like I can't just Google like what temperatures this work best at. I have to do it. I have to like actually make the beer, and then like sometimes they're perfectly successful, and sometimes they're good beers that were more learning experiences than they were like that. Everything lined up and everything was perfect with that one. Yeah. And I needed that again in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you listening to the Beer Temple podcast. I feel like you're like an above average curious person. Like you're more curious than most people.
My mom would be very happy with you saying that.
I just feel like I sort of have that in me as well. Like and that's really why I started even doing my Instagrams, because I was like bothering my wife with like, oh, this is this new band, or this is this new brewery, or whatever. And so like I deep dive into things whenever I get into something. Yeah. So I can like sense that just from hearing you, and I understand. Yeah.
I have like I do have a very curious personality, and I feel like it's different than a lot of other people's. Like when I got into playing the guitar, I started playing the guitar when I was 12. I ended up going to school to like kind of do jazz guitar. I went into it knowing I wanted to do performing arts management, which is like kind of a music business program. But when I got to school, knowing I wasn't like, not that I'd reached a dead end, but that I just wasn't good enough to be a professional guitar player compared to the kids that were there with me, that I started getting really into like building guitars and building guitar pedals. And I really enjoy the process of like, I don't know what the right phrase is, but like kind of surrounding something I care about and trying to figure out everything about how to do it exactly how I see it, how I see its potential in the world. Yeah. And so that's like, I love beer. Like I love beer. Like I fell out of love with it for a little while, because like I wasn't interacting with it in a way that I was really inspiring with it anymore. But I love saison too, and like the way that the craft beer industry is shaken out is that there's playbooks now. There's ways you can be pretty sure you're going to be at least decently financially successful. And no one really had that for saison. So I thought that was a way to, not necessarily like I'm trying to write a playbook or anything, but that I wanted to explore that territory and figure out how to be as creative with selling the beer, getting the beer to the right places, connecting with people with a style of beer that I really thought deserves to be in, like, to be made more.
Yeah, and so that sort of takes you to your business partner, Dylan. Yeah. And did you guys...
He was my college roommate. He has a degree in playing the trumpet. Wow. Yeah, so we lived together for 3 years. Yeah. And then he worked at Pipeworks for a while.
Oh, he did? Oh. Yeah. It's sort of, serendipitous. Neither of you guys are doing like the music thing anymore, but just... You met that way.
I don't think he's ever touched the trumpet since he graduated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I still play the guitar like pretty much every day, but just for fun. But I don't think he plays the trumpet anymore. It's not something you can like pick up and play the same way as a guitar.
So did you sort of approach him like, hey, I think I want to do this, or were you guys homebrewing together when you were in college?
We homebrewed in college when we were living together, and then a little bit after college when we were working at Pipeworks. But neither of us had homebrewed for probably 5-6 years by the time when I wanted to do this. And I just approached him and was like, hey, do you want to do this with me? Yeah. And at the time, I think he was working at like the hotel at the bar at the top of the Ace Hotel, which is like gone. And he wanted to get out of that. But between the time that like I was like, hey, we're going to do this, and then he quit there and he got the job at Foxtrot when Foxtrot had like 3 stores. Yeah. And so by the time we were actually making beer, he had the job at Foxtrot already.
So yeah, he's pretty busy. And
so he's like not that big of a part of ISWAs anymore, but because during the pandemic, Foxtrot blew up. They raised like $160 million, added like 40 locations. Then Dylan had a kid and bought a house, and he was like, I can't. Like, I don't even know if at that point I was paying myself even. So he was just like, I can't, be the father and the person I want to be at my day job while putting as much effort into this. And I was like,
yeah,
I totally understood. It was a tumultuous time, kind of figuring out how we were going to move forward, but we're still like really close friends, and there's we hang out. Well, we don't hang out all that much because he has a kid and lives in Oak Park now, but we talk to each other like every day.
Yeah, I met his wife and his new baby.
Yeah,
when at the I think it was
second anniversary party. Yeah, the last one we had, which was like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah. So I know that from listening to you took a trip to like that Belgian-French border that you were mentioning earlier. Mm-hmm. Was that before you like really kicked off? You just wanted some inspiration, so you decided to go?
Yep. It's kind of, there's a few threads to why I went on that trip. The primary one is that when I was at West Lakeview, it was a crazy place to work, but one of the craziest things we got to do is I went to this thing called the Festival, which is a Shelton Brothers, who was an importer, would bring in the actual brewers from Europe, from these like small little breweries, and have a festival every year. And a lot of the ones that were making IPAs, you would taste them and you'd be like, this tastes like a beer made in America if it was like 8 months old. Mm-hmm. And then you realize, oh, that's because the freshest IPA they've had in, the Netherlands is 8 months old. And so it's not that they weren't great technical brewers. There might have been some like supply chain stuff where they don't get the freshest American hops, but like they were making beers that, to the best of their ability, tasted like old beers here.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to go to Belgium and taste these beers like at the source to be like, is the goal that I think I want to be shooting at a bad version of what these beers are to the people that actually drink them, and what like in a larger quantities and all the time. Turned out it wasn't. They get better as they get older, unlike most beers.
Yeah, I was gonna say they probably don't have as much. Yeah, obviously hops fade if it's like an IPA, but with this, like you have more time for the Brett and whatever.
Yeah, I mean you never know though. So like to go and drink them at the source and be like, is it fundamentally different to drink these in Belgium than it is to drink them in Chicago? And it wasn't. Like there were interesting settings and things that you don't see in America. One of the coolest experiences going to this brewery called Oberon, which is right across the Belgian border into France, like less than a kilometer. And it was one of the few auditory beer experiences I've ever had, because they cage and cork everything, and when they pour them for people, they pop them. There's this huge pops. So there's just pops going off everywhere in their tasting room, and it was really cool to like that was one sense that I've never really engaged in with beers, is the hearing of it. It's like you can hear bubbles coming out of the glass, or you can like sometimes really rapid fermentation, you can hear like a little bit of a crackling or something. But like to have a part of their service, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, just how they poured the beer, involved this very distinct auditory sensation was cool.
And everything was sort of like bottle conditioned then. They didn't have anything kegged?
Yeah, everything they do is everything there. I don't even know if they keg beer at all, even to send here. I think they're 100% bottles, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything they were serving at the cafe was bottled. The other reason, I had a friend who was living in Luxembourg, so I went and said hi to him. We rented a car and we drove across the French-Belgian border, and then up to Brussels. So just to hang out with him. But It was mostly a recon mission of, is the thing that I love and that I associate, the flavor profile I associate with these beers, true to what they are, or have they been beaten up?
Yeah. I dig that. And then so you, I'm assuming it has to do with your relationship with Edmar, but you ended up starting at Mars.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah, I knew Edmar. Edmar's always just kind of around, If you're doing something in Chicago, you're going to run into Edmar at some point. And he was on the show, on the podcast a lot, and I went down there when I was thinking about starting and the original plan was that we would do what we're doing right now, this kind of like, it's not gypsy brewing because we were in one space all the time, but this kind of like residency contract, not contract because I'm actually making the beer, but this like taking up residence in another brewery and using some of their equipment, some of their space, was a way to get the brand going quick. I thought I was going to do that for like 6 months to a year, and we're about 4.5 years into that plan. So,
Yeah.
But I went down there and I talked to Edmar, and I knew that they wanted to grow, and I'd just been part of a brewery that had grown from 200 barrels its first year to like probably 12 to 15,000 at the point I left. I can't remember quite the number, and not that all of that was that was driven by many, many factors, but I saw it happen and I was part of it in some ways. And I went down and talked to him like, hey, let me use your old psychobrew system, which they weren't using at the time, to make small batches of saisons, and in turn, instead of rent, like sit in on all your meetings and I'll consult for you of like how to like get more efficient and how to grow. Now that didn't totally plan out because 6 months after we started there, everything shut down. So, but yeah, Edmar was like, it was great. He like let us use it for like, we paid no rent for over the entire year we were there for the first year, just by my consulting work for them. And the Psycho Brew is like not really a portable system, but we had to like roll it out of the back, push it into place, connect it to the gas, bring all the vessels out to brew on them, clean them all, and then put them back in their back room on like weekends.
Yeah, I'm sure like their regular system they're using is probably just way too large for...
We would use that every once in a while. Like if we were trying to double batch something, we would use their big system. Their big system's like 20 barrels, and we were making 5.
Yeah.
So we would use half the size of their big system if we were trying to double batch something, but that was only a few times.
Is there? I mean, I guess so. Then you moved to Beguile.
Yeah.
And was that just like an effort to get a little closer to where you were living, or?
Mars was adding a distilling license to their brewing license, and so when you do that, you have to like carve out these areas in your brewery to say this is for the distilled products, this is for the beer, and the place that we were using, that we were fermenting everything, they were going to put as the distillery. Mm-hmm. So they told us we had to get out of there.
Yeah.
And then like I don't think that ended up happening as quickly as they thought, so they're like, you can stay, and I'd already set up stuff here. So we were able to have we were kind of in the middle of everything over there, and here we're very much kind of removed from it, and could separate everything out and have our own space.
Yeah, you have a nice like space across the alley. It's sort of like your own, almost like a really large garage.
Yeah,
I guess
it's basically a really large garage. I think it's about 600 square feet. And then we use Beguile's actual brew house to make wort, put it into our fermenters, and then our fermenters are that you can forklift them. So we forklift them, bring them over here to keep the yeast separated from what they do.
Yeah, that was my next question. Was there ever any fear of like a cross-contamination at Mars or here?
So the tanks we were using at Mars were things that they had used for kind of wilder beer and saison before, but they kind of that program wasn't as big when we were there, so we got to use those. And then here, all of the tanks and all of the hoses and everything past the brew house is ours, so there's no crossover. We never use any of their equipment after we've pitched yeast into something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't want to be the guy who comes in and ruins your brewery.
Yeah.
Be a bad look.
You had mentioned how everything shut down pretty quickly after you guys started up. Do you think that in some ways the pandemic may have helped you, or how do you think that affected you as a brewery?
I mean, you have to look for those things, right? You have to look for the things that are better because this terrible thing happened. Otherwise, you lose your mind.
Yeah.
Do I think it's hard to tell? We're very small and we make a very small amount of money. And if I could look back and be like, hey, I wish like 4 years ago I was able to make the amount of money that I'll be able to make when we actually have a tap room now. Mm-hmm. I might think of it differently, but we did get to work out a lot of process stuff, and a lot of like the way that we make beer now is different than the way we started. The goals are the same, but my ability to turn out a saison the way I want it is much better now than it was 4 years ago. And I think if we had moved into a larger brewery with a tap room and everything, we would have branched out into other styles a lot faster and might have lost that. But the fact that we've only been using one strain of Saccharomyces yeast. We've never used anything else. We've developed our like kind of house style and some of our own house cultures. We developed like an aesthetic that people kind of recognize as our brewery. All that stuff would have happened very differently if the time frame that I originally thought we would have our own space on it would have come to fruition.
Yeah.
And I think we've made some like connections with people. Like during the pandemic, I was able to deliver beer right to people's houses, and I dropped every single beer off except for maybe 1 week when I had to work in the brewery. I had one of my friends do it, but just to be not to claim all the drop offs, but I got to meet people and like say hello and like tell them the story face to face. And for a brewery that only makes about 100 barrels of beer a year right now, like having connections with people like that is huge. People have like genuinely become like friends, like you and like just some guys, other people that like I would drive to their houses and met their families and stuff.
Yeah, and for those so Illinois relaxed their laws and is what allowed him to do that. And I don't think I had you at the house dropping off stuff every week, but it was like at least every other week.
Yeah, it was a good amount. It was a fun time.
But yeah, it was good. I felt like I was either outside playing with my son, and so it was like my son was born right before the shutdown, so it was kind of like a nice time for me during that. But and then talking baseball and everything. Yeah. But one of my questions. So I love saisons, and so like when I go to a saison brewery, I always ask them like how difficult is it, and I'll just use Sundial as an example. I was chatting with him like how difficult is it to sell this, because it's not the first thing that comes to mind when someone thinks craft beer, and it's more of I think that I wondered if that face-to-face opportunity aided you, because when someone sees something on the shelf somewhere, they may not understand what they're in for, or like why that's more expensive or that kind of thing.
I mean, there's a lot of familiarity issues with it. Like most people don't even know what a saison is. Like most people who are into craft beer nowadays don't know or care to know like what a saison is. Whereas when like I was getting into it, like these were kind of like not the pinnacle, but it was like the coolest hip thing to drink. There's also like more than that. I think it's just format. Like we're in like 16.9 ounce bottles too, which is a little confusing to people that have. Most people who drink craft beer now started drinking craft beer well after 16-ounce 4-packs of cans were completely normal. Mm-hmm. And bottles were just like never cool. And there's a lot of like kind of business reasons we use the format of bottle we use, but there's also a lot of creative choice. Like it's a creative choice too, that this is meant to be something you're going to focus a little bit on, and putting it in this package makes it you think about it differently than you're just going to slam 4 tall boys. Yeah. And that definitely precludes us. Then the packaging is like probably 5 times as expensive as a can, so it causes us to have to charge more for the beer. The beers take longer to make, so all that adds into the price we have to sell it at.
You guys are using a lot of like real fruit, not extracts.
Always real fruit. Yeah, we'll never use an extract. We might use a puree, but we'll never use an extract.
Yeah, just to like add another reason why it's a premium product.
Yeah, I mean every ingredient is sourced as locally as we can find it, and it's all almost entirely directly from the producer. Yeah, like there's plenty of companies that sell all sorts of brewing ingredients, but we don't use any of them. Our malt comes directly from the maltster. Our hops come from the guys who grow the hops. The fruit comes from farms in Michigan. The yeasts come from the yeast bank, or I find them myself or source them from other bottles that we really appreciate. Yeah. So like it's part of what my belief system about making beer is trying to support other people who make things too, as much as possible.
And I feel like that is sort of like something that carries over through a lot of the saison breweries. Is that like local first ethos? Yeah. And I know, so going back to the education part, I know you have a newsletter that you have a lot of information in whenever you release a beer, and I'm not saying that like
no, I know they're I'm a little long-winded sometimes.
Yeah. I enjoy it. I am one that nerds out over it, so I appreciate knowing everything and why you do things.
Everything is kind of sorry, you finish your question. Everything in those is like structured so that if you only want to read one sentence, you'll get what's happening. Yeah. Like it's always like this beer is coming out and here's what it is, and then they kind of like everything else is opt-in. The idea is that mirrors how I want to make our beers, where if you don't know anything about beer, you have one, you'll enjoy it. You don't need to know anything. Yeah. And then if you want to engage with it really further, the rabbit hole can get as deep as you want to go. And the only way that happens is if I put way too much thought into it, and then find a way to produce something or express something that's as simple enough for someone who has no idea what's going on to understand.
Yeah, so I noticed that you have a glossary of some of the terms that may be more unfamiliar with a layperson.
That was, to be perfectly honest, that was my dad's idea. Because he is super supportive, but he's not really that into beer. So when I would be like, oh, this one has Brettanomyces in it, he's like, I don't have any idea what that is. I'm like, it's bottle conditioned. He's like, I don't know what that sounds cool, but I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah.
So like defining the terms that I spend all day thinking about for people who want to try our beer or understand what it is was something that I didn't think about but was super helpful for him to add it. And like our beers can be confusing or challenging or weird because they have yeast that produce atypical flavors sometimes, but that isn't the point of them. It isn't trying to be like a complex weird thing that you have to have a certain level of understanding of beer to enjoy. That's a failure if that's the only person who's going to enjoy the beers. We make these not because just because I love them and think they should exist, but because we love people who drink beer and think they should get to try these things too.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of breweries make beers like this, and it's honestly not the most financially rewarding style of beer to make. But part of that is like you got to meet people where they're at, and then be like, come a little closer, you know? Like I'll meet you where you're at. I'll tell you everything you want to know, or as little as you want to know about this is possible. But you should follow me to this part of the world or this part of the beer industry and see what's going on over here, because there's cool people over here too.
Yeah. Do you think that niching down also maybe helped you grow that more fervent following than trying to just come out with 6 different styles?
100%. Yeah. I mean, if we were trying to be a generalist brewery and make, a IPA, a pale ale, a lager, and have like a saison as part of it, it's way harder to get into someone's like memory or like their thoughts about breweries, because I don't want to like pigeonhole us. I mean, we only do this one thing right now, but like if you think of all the breweries that make all the styles of beer, you can't. The list goes on infinitely. Yeah. Especially if you're like, those guys, they're like the saison guys, right? Like is a better hook for us.
Yeah.
And like we've made some lists of like best saison producers, this and that we would have no business making if we specialized in pale ale or IPA or something. There's just way too many. So making like national, international lists of like quality producers is huge for people being like, for lending credibility. I mean, those are somewhat secondary to the fact that I wanted to make these. I really thought these were important beers for people to have and to keep these flavor profiles like alive. But yeah, like that, I would be lying if I didn't say that part of the strategy was like, well, so we're going to specialize in something and try to do it really, really well, so that over time people will be like, well, we know they're world class at doing this, so even if it's not my thing, other people think they're the best at it, so we should try that. Or they'll try their pale ale when we ever make that, or their lager, and try to get their take on it if they're really good at making this other style of beer. So
yeah, and I feel like trying to make things the best is like that focus on ingredients that we've talked about, and sourcing local ingredients as much as you can. But you've had some like fun stuff where you've gotten like, I think it was like peaches off of like, was it like Dylan's grandma's tree?
Oh, lychees. Yeah, she lives in Florida, and she has a lychee tree where she like picked lychees and overnighted them to us.
That's pretty.
Yeah, she couldn't get that many because she's kind of short, but that was a really fun beer.
Where do you find inspiration for your recipes that you're now writing for this?
They come from a lot of places. Most of them come from things that you kind of taste in your mind's eye or mind's palate, for whatever that is, where like I think this flavor profile would be really cool, and then I work backwards, and it's kind of hard to describe what that like creative impulse is in words. It literally is like if you have an image of a apple or something, except it's, instead of it being a visual image, and you go try to paint it, instead of it being a visual image, it's like a taste profile, taste image, that you then try to work backwards to figure out how do we use things that exist in the real world to make this like abstract idea of a flavor. A lot of it's that. Some of it is that I'll encounter a really interesting ingredient and then be like, how do we build a beer around this?
Yeah.
Some of it's just straight up like, I think, let's not overthink it. Like peaches and beer taste really good, so let's make a really good peach beer.
Yeah.
But I guess that's similar to like ingredients being inspiring.
But yeah, you also like with that. I feel like a lot of times in your write-ups, if you have a peach, peaches taste good in beer, but you are specifically like picking out a certain strain of Brett or whatever that's going to like accentuate. And I've heard you say in another podcast that your job is more not to control the ingredients, but to have like this like symbiotic relationship with them and to sort of like lead them on to do their best.
Yeah. Like most commercial brewing is about control and consistency of like, we want to use this ingredient and we want it to taste exactly like this. And we want it to be the same every batch, every year, whatever. Particularly with the fruit beers, the goal is to make them the best version of that harvest's fruit they can be. And then typically it's to use fermentation in ways to elevate, underline, or contrast the flavors we're going to get from like a perfectly ripe Michigan peach.
Yeah.
Or apricots. Like we're sitting around these drums that are like right behind you that have all these different fruit beers that we're working on, and all of them are, okay, here's what the essence of this peach is, or these raspberries or this strawberry, and so what can we do to make the beer best celebrate that thing? Because like it's like magic, dude. Like the sun beats down on the earth, and this weird little seed happens to grow this. Like it's like this specific fruit that has these flavor profiles and this aroma. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so to try to celebrate that as like a insane phenomenon that we get to like enjoy, rather than just like a commodity we can put into a beer to make it taste different, is what I'm trying to do with those fruit beers.
Yeah, and getting things when they're actual ripe and they're not,
Yeah. And like, we'll never be a very big brewery, just because of kind of the stubbornness of an ethos like that. Like when we get those peaches, we get about 200 pounds of peaches, and I go through every one by hand, feel it if it's ripe or not, and if it's ripe, then we cut the pit out of it, add it to the beer, and if it's not ripe, it goes back in the box until it ripens.
Yeah.
So like it's, by doing it, we couldn't do that if we were going to do 100 barrels of it. We're doing 3,
Yeah.
So capturing every single peach at its peak of freshness is what that beer is, and so that's why it tastes that way. And then adding some yeast or some processes to it that will elevate that further, or really celebrate that peach is.
And do you like
what we try to do?
Do you like deep dive on different Brett strains to see like what's going to work best with each one, or do you kind of just like have that institutional knowledge at this point?
Yeah, when we started, like when we were bottle conditioning, we bottle conditioned pretty much half of everything we do with Brettanomyces. And when we started, that was a bunch of rotating Brettanomyces to kind of understand and pick apart what do these individual strains do. Now we've gotten to the point where I know the blend. I know the strains that are available to us well enough to know them individually. And then I know our blend well enough that we just use the same blend for bottles that just say bottle finished with Brettanomyces for the most part. And then the individual strains you get to know well enough that you're like, okay, this makes lemon-like flavors. That would be cool with raspberries.
Yeah.
Or this makes this kind of like funky cherry pie. Let's put that with rhubarb. And then, you just get familiar with. It's not dissimilar from like learning an instrument, where you get familiar with like the technical things you need to do to produce a sound, but you get familiar with it enough to say something cohesive, to the point where no one's thinking about, oh, he can play scales really fast, and we're like, oh yeah, he played 4 notes, but it's a perfect melody or a nice melody that we want, like that was right for that song.
Yeah.
That's how I think about a lot of that too, where it's like we spend a lot of time learning a lot about Brettanomyces and learning a lot about fruit to just be like, we're just going to pick one, and it's going to be an expression of that. And I like that approach to brewing too, where it's simple. It's one fruit, it's one strain of Brettanomyces, it's one strain of like saison yeast, and it's probably 2 malts and 2 hops.
Yeah.
Simpler the better. I like pure expressions of things like that in beer more than I like we used, papaya, orange, and guava. And now I don't know what any of those actually taste like individually. So, not that those beers are bad by any means. It's just not, if I'm going to make something myself and spend, 6 months on it, it's going to be something that you can be like, that is a unique, pure expression of that thing.
Yeah. Is there any fruit that you haven't had the opportunity to work with, or that you just like haven't made the jump to that you want to?
That's a good question. I can't think of any off the top of my head. We've done a lot of fruit beers in the last 4 years and gotten to use a lot of things I didn't think. Like the first year we made beer, we couldn't get apricots. There was like a polar vortex that killed all the apricot trees. So for like 2 years, I was trying to make a beer with apricots, and now we've done it a couple of times. I'm sure there are.
No, if you,
I can't.
that's all good.
Usually, if there's something where I'm like, I don't have an accounting department, so if I'm like, I want to try that one, it's like, well, it's $8 a pound. I'm like, yeah, it's fine, we're gonna buy it.
That's exactly what my mind was just going. When I was a kid, there was a starfruit tree that I used to skateboard by and just like grab a starfruit as I went by. That would probably be uber expensive, and they're not like a super, like, not pungent's not the right word, but they're not like a strong flavored fruit.
That gets tough. Like if the predominant character of a fruit is that it's sweet and tart, it becomes really hard to make beer with, especially the style of beer we're making, because all the sugar ferments out. So then you have to figure like, what are we left with after we ferment this out?
Yeah.
Starfruit would be awesome. We'd have to use
a
lot of it. And I don't even know if I've ever had a starfruit.
You see them in a store sometimes, but it's like crazy. It's like a couple dollars a piece, so it's really expensive.
Honestly, the one that I like is my, not white whale, but that I've tried. One of the few things I've tried and failed at so far in this brewery is making a good carrot beer. Carrots are something that I want to make a good beer with.
I'm trying to remember. Does the Scratch do one?
Scratch has made a carrot beer. I think Keeping Together made like a roasted carrot beer.
Right. Yeah.
But stuff like that, like, and carrots and
beets are interesting in some beers.
Beets, yeah. But mostly carrots are the thing,
Yeah.
And mostly because I failed at it the last time.
So it's like,
the
the
beer
challenge.
tasted terrible. Nothing like carrots, and it was just like...
You didn't release it?
No, dumped it. Yeah.
Dumped it.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is cool, and maybe this is something that saison breweries generally do, but how you add the fruit or whatever you're using cold side, so that you're getting... Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're not... I'll let you speak to it. You can do it much better than I can.
Yeah, I think a lot of breweries now are adding aseptic purees cold side because you have to retain some of the characters that will be volatilized off if you boil it. But we're not using aseptic fruit. We're using the fruit as it exists in nature. And a lot of those fruits, a lot of their character comes from microflora that lives on the fruit. So the way a peach smells is partially because the peach smells like that. And then it's partially because there's, some lactic acid bacteria or wild yeast that lives on that peach that creates the aromas that you associate with peach. So when we get fruit, we typically don't clean it if it looks like, if there's like caked on dirt or anything.
Yeah.
We take out any pits or anything like that, and then we add them directly to the beer the day we get them, and then the beer goes on it immediately. And the idea is that any microflora that was living on that fruit will hopefully ferment the beer and the sugars in the fruit as well, to create a whole like new experience with that fruit.
It's kind of like a terroir-esque idea. That's
absolutely a terroir-esque idea.
Yeah. I've heard you say it before, and I just did something that stuck with me.
Yeah.
So do you, for a lot of your beers, you do like a regular version and then the Brett version of it? Mm-hmm. Where did that concept come from?
Mostly it was wanting to learn about the individual strains of Brett as they behaved in the bottles. Because you can like do a bunch of 1 gallon kind of experiments with it, but it never really turns out the way that actually producing a product with the thing, producing a larger batch with it's going to be.
Yeah.
It was partially driven by like wanting to learn about those yeasts, and then it was Orval is a beer that I love. I'm not like a crazy Orval person like Mike from Afterthought or something that just like loves it out of all proportion, but that inspiration of putting that in the bottle as something that kind of like protects the beer, creates different flavors, creates a living product, That was a big inspiration there too, and wanting to see how the beers would age differently.
Yeah, just that's something that I like to like geek out. Like when you would release something, I would make sure I grabbed both, like the Brett and the regular, just to see what it does. Because a lot of Brett Ford beers I love. Yeah, and so it's sort of like a win-win.
It also led to, this wasn't the intention, but we found that when we add Brett later in the process, we get a very different character than if it's like earlier, or if we add mixed culture later in the process. It's a very different experience than when there's like way more sugar for that to eat, and way more acid for those bugs to produce, or way more funk for them to produce. It's kind of it's just like a finishing touch. It's like a little sprinkle of seasoning on top of it, rather than it being like the main
Salt Bay
protein. Britannomyces Salt Bay.
So I know that you use you started with a commercial version of the Blagi yeast strain. And I know that yeast is a living thing; it develops over time. So you have your own like house imprint of a yeast.
It's still that yeast, and we restarted every once in a while. It's not like we haven't had the same. It's not like our mixed culture, which is like we've never like banked it. We've never gotten anything from like never like gotten the blend from a lab. There's parts of it that came from a lab, but that was repitched from other mixed culture we have. The Blaugie, the yeast we use from Blaugie, we use for like as many generations as it's still healthy. We open top ferment and we top crop, which gives you the healthiest yeast, but we don't brew as often as a lot of breweries. So if you let that sit for 3-4 weeks, it's just not going to be as viable. So if we're not going to brew for like a month, which sometimes happens, because we've had a stockpile of stuff, then we'll restart that process with that same culture. And we find it's great. It definitely changes over generations. The clarity of the beer gets way clearer the further generations we go on. Its ester production changes. It goes up and down depending on what phase we're at, and that's part of one of the indicators of like, okay, we're gonna have to like probably like get a new pitch soon because the esters slow down a little bit.
I know you guys want the esters. Does it affect the acidity over time? Like would the acidity change over time for different generations of the yeast?
The only way it would change over time is if something else got in there.
Okay.
Like because we ferment open top, if some lactic acid bacteria got into it, and then the yeast wasn't as like strong of a fermenter, and that lactic acid bacteria acidified the beer. The Brett that we use now definitely has some lactic acid bacteria in it because it has dregs from other people that we've collaborated mixed culture in it as well. Yeah. But again, trying to keep that as like a lower percentage. It's still Brett forward. Those will get a little bit more acidic as they age, but the culture itself, the single saison culture shouldn't change the pH over time unless it's not healthy and something else is fermenting that beer.
And the idea to open top ferment and be able to top crop, is that something that is traditional, or is that something you came across?
It's traditional in English brewing. I don't know. In theory, it would have to be traditional in like Belgian brewing because the cylindrical conical tank was not a thing until much later in brewing. It mostly was a function of learning about how esters are produced and what causes ester production. And the biggest things are lack of pressure on the beer. Even when you put a top on and like a blow off, there's still pressure on that yeast, and you get pressure on the beer. It's a minimal amount, but that small amount can really change your ester profile. Some people think it has to do with oxygen exposure, but it's so aggressive. It's fermenting so aggressively that anything that the beer or the krausen is touching is going to be CO2. So there really isn't that. That one's more of a myth about open top fermentation, at least for the way that we're doing it with the yeast we're using. But mostly it's pressure.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you about collaborations that you've done, and I feel like you've done a lot of collaborations. Yeah. I don't mean that in a bad way, sure. But I mean, you hear stories or whatever that a lot of it's just like a photo op. But I feel like when you do it, there's really some intentionality behind it. I mean, you guys usually do one with your mixed culture and then another bottling of like with their mixed culture. So I feel like what you guys do with it is exciting, and it's cool just to see how it changes the beer.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's your experience with, I mean, do you like enjoy doing it?
Yeah. I mean, I love doing collaborations with people, and the best ones are ones where we can both like kind of learn something from the other person, and where we make something that obviously came from our brewery, but we would never do if we were just left to our own devices. So either that's like ingredient choice, process, use of different yeasts, different Brettanomyces. We're trying to like create a real relationship. Hopefully we have one with the people we collaborate with, which is almost always how ours works. That I have a strong relationship with whatever the brewery or person or restaurant or whatever we're collaborating with is, and then there's something that they do or they can offer that would be completely different than what we would do on our own. Yeah. Like right now we actually have 2 collaborations in the tanks behind me. One is, it's actually a collaboration with a podcast, which is kind of weird, but it's one of my friends who does this podcast that I was on a while ago called Joiners. His dad has a farm in Harvard, Illinois, and they have bees on it. And so he was like, can we make would you want, on the show, I was talking about tree tipper and how we use this honey for this process and stuff. And he's like, my dad has bees. You want to make a collaboration with that honey? And it's honey we would never have used before. It's probably something we might have done at some point, is make a beer de miel. But that beer exists the way it exists because of that guy's dad's honey. Yeah. And we wouldn't have made it the same way if it was just me making a beer de miel. And then the other one right now is a collaboration with a restaurant called Akahoshi, which is a ramen restaurant. And we're using koji rice in it, which is like it's the thing that makes sake, but it's also the thing that makes miso. And so most people, when they use koji rice, they're just going to throw it in the mash and be like, we use koji rice, nice. We actually, like, you watch me just put, 8 pounds of koji rice into the fermenting beer. Yeah. Because we're trying to get the enzymes and the yeast in koji to ferment the beer a little bit the way that it would ferment sake or miso, because this guy specifically makes miso ramen as his like number one, like his ideal miso or ideal ramen bowl. Yeah. So I wouldn't have done that without talking to this guy. It's a wheat-based saison too, to like kind of like mimic his the noodles he makes, which we don't use a lot of wheat. We use some other like adjunct ingredients. So a lot of those choices were based on like, how do we make something that's representative of what we do? Because it's our yeast, it's a saison. It's going to be very dry and crushable, and then inspired by what he's doing. Yeah, and so that's always what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I love, just to name a couple other ones, I love the agave one that you did with Sacred Agave.
I'm actually going to Mexico on Sunday to source agave for the next one.
Like Oaxaca?
We're going to Durango, which is a little bit further north. Okay. But Lou who runs Sacred Agave, which is a nonprofit that we do that collaboration with, part of what people are talking about now is sustainability in agave-based spirits like mezcal. Is about not just drinking mezcal from Oaxaca, because a lot of those are turning into monocultures of espadín because it matures faster. They can make a consistent product with it, and the larger markets, just the funky weird ones for $180 a bottle are awesome, but like they're not driving that industry. Yeah. So he's trying to highlight other agave growing regions and other varietals. So I'm not even entirely sure what type of varietal we're getting yet. We're gonna go down there, go to the palenque that's roasting it, and then see what they're harvesting.
That's cool.
And then make a beer around that.
Yeah. And when you guys did that, it was during the pandemic, and I know you guys had like a whole package where there was like a print of like the two of you.
Yeah, that was really cool. That one we did. That was espadín agave. That one was from Bonhez. Yeah. And Alex, who's one of the national like Bonhez education person, lives in Chicago. So he like put together a bunch of like art from people from Mexican people, copitas which are the little like earthenware glasses. And then I don't know how legal it was, but we gave everyone a little bit of the mezcal and ordered the package. So.
Yeah, I still have a little bit left, I think. Mezcal actually kind of introduced me to mezcal. That's like my go-to when I'm somewhere and I'm having a cocktail.
It's great, man. Me too. I used to be a big whiskey guy. Yeah. But now I'm much more interested in drinking like a neat pour of some weird mezcal.
Yeah. I haven't got to like deep dive. I need to go to like Dove's or something and just like.
Dove's is great.
Do like a flight of mezcal or something.
Stereo. is another like crazy mezcal list.
Huh.
It's like, I don't know, it's impenetrable to my mind though. Like I have no idea. Like I know a couple of varietals I like, and then I'll have them from other producers. I'm like, I didn't taste anything like what I thought it was going to taste like. So you just kind of got to get on and enjoy the ride. Like,
yeah.
I don't know how much learning I've done, but we'll hopefully some on this trip.
Yeah. I just want to emphasize, like, I love the way you do collaborations, and like with the restaurants, like you said, I think you guys did a kvass where you were using bread from a baker or a restaurant.
Yeah, Jeff and Jude, rest in peace.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, didn't mean to. Yeah, but no, I appreciate that you guys are like truly making it to where it's like a collaboration. We are working together on something.
Yeah, there's got to be some reason other than just like, hey, you have a brewery, I have a brewery.
Yeah,
let's make a beer together.
And then how did you learn? So I know you had the minor in business administration. Mm-hmm. Do you think that helped you? Was it sort of like you had to like refresh maybe, but do you think that helped in terms of growing the business and deciding to do things for an economical reason or not do things?
No, I wish, man. One of the worst grades I got in college was in accounting, and that sucks because I have to do a lot of accounting now. Yeah. And I was like, my arrogant 19-year-old self was like, I'm just gonna hire someone. I'll have someone who's smarter than me do the accounting, and now it's just me, so I have to like do all the accounting mostly myself. We have a tax accountant, so I don't like really get in trouble with the government. But
Uncle Sam's
like,
not
the day-to-day QuickBooks, that's me, baby. And like, a lot of the stuff that's business related for me is mostly from my dad. He worked for this company this nonprofit called Junior Achievement, which was about teaching financial literacy in schools. And I would play with the kits that they would bring into the classrooms, like some of the things I would play with when I was a little kid. And then we just continually have a meeting every Thursday where we just talk about like what's going on with the business, and more it's like management and leadership, which sounds silly when it's a business of just me. Mm-hmm. But that stuff is really important, even if you're just like the clarity of vision of what you're doing and why is much more important when there's other people, but even when you're by yourself. And when I think about business, like accounting is mostly just like you just do it. You have to do it right or you didn't do it right, right? There's a lot of that business stuff where it's like there's not a lot of creativity necessarily in how you fill out the forms to get your bank loan. Like, in fact, there should be none. Like, like the more creative you are, the more likely you're committing fraud. Yeah. So it's more like this philosophical stuff about how to run a business and why I'm running a business that I do with him. I took marketing and stuff in college, and I thought it was the most useless time I had. I was trying to work in the music industry in 2007 to 2011 was when I was in college, and that was not a great time to try to get in the music industry. But what it was a great time for was watching people try to figure out how to make something work in an industry that was completely changing. Mm-hmm. So I went to this thing called the Digital Music Summit, I believe is what it was called, in Nashville, Tennessee. This guy named Mike Masnick, who runs TechCrunch, which is like Tech Dirt. It's like a news outlet for things happening in like Silicon Valley and stuff like that. He invented the term the Streisand effect, actually. Oh, wow. But he gave this speech and keynote specifically about like Nine Inch Nails and a couple other people, and the whole idea of it was the new paradigm in making money in music is to connect to your fans and give them a reason to buy something you make. Because like when you make something that can just be copied infinitely and taken for free, like why would someone buy the music, right? Yeah. And so obviously you can't replicate a bottle of my beer and give it to someone else. But that sticks with me, where it's like all we're really doing, because I'm not making a commodity that's widgets that you need like Tylenol or something. Mm-hmm. I'm making something that you have to choose to buy that is more or less a luxury item. And so it's all about like it's always been how do I connect with people, and then give them a reason to want to buy the things I'm making. Other than just like it'll get you drunk. Yeah. It tastes good. It tastes good is a very good reason. Yeah. Get you drunk is a fun reason.
I'll say most of it's pretty low ABV, so I don't know if that would work.
Yeah, right. Well, that's like I don't drink things that are above like 7% anymore, but that's just more of a personal thing. But yeah, that's like that. Taking that lesson from like trying to go to college for music at that time is huge. And like we tried to apply that at Pipeworks too, right? Even when an industry was doing the opposite. Like craft beer when I was working at Pipeworks was doing the opposite of what music was doing when I was in college. But we still always wanted to like kind of like that idea of undersell, over deliver, or like make something that's like, well, I got to try that, and then obviously connect with people that would be interested in buying that. So.
Yeah, taking that all into account, how from your like business plan that you created when this was all starting, how does that look now? Like, are you going the trajectory you thought you would, or is there?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, when I started there was no like written out business plan. There were like thoughts and ideas of what this was going to be. I mean, numbers wise, we're much smaller than I assumed we would be 4.5 years into this. But like philosophically, it's more exciting to me now than it's ever been. And I think that I've never been prouder of the beers we're making too. I guess I don't know if that really answers that question.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think it's good, because I mean I know you guys weren't like approaching like investors and all that. Like, it was just you guys starting, so it wasn't something you had to have in writing, I guess.
Right. We do now. I mean, we're applying for an SBA loan. As after this, I got to go fill out some documents to get approved for an SBA loan, and that does have a business, like a legit 12-page business plan. But to be honest, like having worked at Pipeworks, which is not dissimilar from a lot of breweries, you can write that plan, and then like 2 weeks in, things are gonna be different. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't plan for things, but you always, and this is something I learned from my guitar teacher in college, where like I wasn't that great at playing the guitar, and he very politely said, Mike, the right note at the wrong time is the wrong note. Because I would always I just didn't have a good sense of feel or sense of time. But that like applies to this too, right? Where you have to like understand the situation your business is actually in, and be responding to the place you're at and the future that you see now, as opposed to like, well, it's in the business plan that we're supposed to be making $2 million by this point.
Yeah.
Or that like we should be making 500 barrels or 5,000 barrels. Like, of course you want those projections to be accurate, and you do your best to like plan accordingly to what you understand to be the reality at the time. But the most important thing is to constantly reassess what is reality and what does the future look like from this point forward, not from 3 steps back.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up one of your more exciting beers, the Levant. Is it Levant? Levain.
Yeah.
Levain.
Whatever you said. I don't even know how to say it. I don't speak French.
Yeah.
I throw things in Google Translate and then put accent marks on where they're supposed to go.
Yeah. Which means it has to do with like starter, like a sourdough starter.
Yeah, so it's like the intermediate step between like the starter you feed every day and actually making like bread dough that you'll ferment into loaves of bread. You make this thing in between called a levain that will kind of kickstart your yeast.
Yeah, and I feel like, not that, so everyone, like, there's Dark Lord Day, there's all this stuff, but you have a Levain Day, and it's sort of like
not as big as Dark Lord.
Yeah, no, not as big. I haven't attended yet, but I know it's just something. Maybe you would say it's like your most celebrated beer or something. Where
it's the thing I try to emphasize the most, for sure.
Yeah,
and I think it's the thing that people respond to the most.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how much of that is that the beer itself is like on its face that special to people, and how much of it is else being like, no, this is one you really need to pay attention to.
I had the cherry one. I just drank it like a few months ago.
Nice.
From 2022, but that was like one of my favorite beers last year.
Awesome. Thank you.
That was
Appreciate
good.
That. Yeah, I mean, it takes us
beer.
like almost 4 years, three and a half years to make some of that beer.
Yeah.
And that's something I was like really terrified about making, because it's hard.
Yeah.
And it can go wrong in a lot of ways. And I had never done anything like it before. Like, we had made some cursory saisons at Pipeworks. I had made saisons when I was home brewing, but I'd never tried to make like a fully barrel fermented beer with a mixed culture of Brettanomyces and dregs from other people's bottles and our saison yeast. And then like the reason it's called Levain is I grew up some of the culture from my sourdough starter that I had going at that point for like 7 years, which now is like over 10 years old. And I didn't know if it would work, and there's no way to do it, or it's a waste. It's interesting in my mind. It's a waste of time to do it on a small scale, because it takes so long that if I get 3 years in and I'm like, oh, it worked, and I have 6 bottles of it, it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
So we filled full barrels from kind of the beginning to be like, if it's going to work, if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. But if it's going to work, it has to work at this scale.
Yeah. And when you blend that, is it like you have to empty the barrel completely, or is it more of like a Solera method where you're kind of like taking and adding?
I try to empty the barrel completely. There's like, so we can fit about 4.5 barrels of beer into one of the tanks that we have. And so if there's 5 barrels that I think are good enough to be in this year's Levan and they work together as the blend, then we'll put 4.5 and one we'll have to leave some in one of them. But best practices in my mind for that is to empty the barrel completely and start anew again when we've refilled them.
Yeah, and sorry, go on.
That brewing process the blending process is way different for Levan than anything I did at Pipeworks when I was doing barrels there, because the barrels at Pipeworks are almost always what I call like an act of omission, where you just take out barrels that don't work that well, but all those stouts are, basically you're building on top of each thing. It's just, the same thing kind of over and over. There's some subtleties, and you don't really blend to like create a new flavor. When we're blending these, there's like, certain barrels when they come together make this wholly different third thing. So it's more of an additive blending process than one where it's like we're trying to take out ones that would diminish the blend. We're trying to create this whole new third or fourth thing from the way that these barrels are getting blended.
Yeah, and you guys are doing, for the release day and all that, you guys are doing like pretty cool ceramic mugs that are designed by Joseph Carl?
Yeah, Joe Kraft. Joseph Carl Kraft on Instagram.
Yeah.
But I've only ever called him Joe.
Oh.
But yeah, he was this trained ceramicist. Like he has a degree in ceramics, got some like scholarships and fellowships to like travel around the Southwest and Europe, like studying ceramics. But now he draws all of our labels. His art, when we started using him, was like almost entirely abstract art, and it was mostly, or as often, was like kind of clay drawings, where he would like make 3-dimensional drawings out of clay, and they would like hang on walls. They are super cool, and he's amazing. His mugs are incredible. Like there's, I was like, how different can it be? I just wanted to do something cool. The first time we made the mugs with him, and I got one, I was like, oh, this is like, it feels like this mug is like a pet, or it's alive in some way. Like there's character to this mug that, like, I could never imagine doing if I was taking a ceramics class or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, over time he's evolved into this like more, he's a more draws 2D things, but he's always going to be making some mugs for us.
And yeah, how did you come across him? Did you just like find him on Instagram or something?
He worked with Dylan and Tiffany at Little Goat.
Oh.
And so they had been friends. And I remember Dylan being like, when they had some of his art hanging in their apartment. And I was like, who did that? And they're like, oh, Joe. I'm like, tall Joe, because he's like 6'9". And they're like, yeah. And Dylan, I'm like, we should get him to do a label. And Dylan's like, oh, it's kind of like weird and abstract. I'm like, that's kind of like our beers, dude. So like, the first one is the first peach beer we did, and it literally is just like these like kind of wavy lines. Like he didn't really draw people until like 10 labels in. And the intention wasn't necessarily for Joe to be the only artist. We were using a lot of artists then, but Joe's art was just so strong and so unique and so well aligned with what I think our beers are. And he was really professional and great to work with.
Yeah, I feel like it gives you guys like a real nice look, like a brand, if you will. Yeah, they're beautiful labels.
He's the man.
Yeah. So I sort of, to go on, like what's next? Like what's the plan for like what do you have on the horizon? What are your goals?
We're close to something. I don't really know if I can say it yet because there's still a few balls in the air, but we want to have our own space, both to make our beers and to present them to people. That's the ultimate goal, next step goal. And then beyond that, just to create a business that is both creatively fulfilling for everyone in it and can provide a life worth living for people.
Are you envisioning a tap room or like a brew pub where there's like food involved with?
Tap room, probably.
Tap room.
Yeah. I don't want to run a kitchen.
I know. Yeah.
I don't know how to.
Yeah, I know Chris has been doing it at the Beer Temple recently, and he seems like he's like stressed about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone you ever talk to about a kitchen, it's just like, it's so much work.
Yeah.
And I get it if you're in like an industrial park in the middle of nowhere in a suburb or something.
Yeah.
But if we're in the city of Chicago, close to other food options, like most people run their kitchen at their brewery to hopefully break even. And I was like, well, we can just let people bring food in. Like, you don't want them to leave, obviously. You want people to stay and drink more of your beers responsibly. But I'm just like, right now, it would probably cost more to build a kitchen out in a space than it would to like get a brewery going in right now.
For sure. And do you feel like you have a desire to do? You mentioned earlier you have a desire to do a little more than saison if like once you get your own space.
Yeah.
I guess what does that look like? Are you wanting to do stuff that still things you love, like lager, pale ale, like that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, exactly. Like things that I think we've developed a point of view as a brewery that doesn't specifically require it to be a saison. And there's other styles of beer that I love. I love lagers. I drink a lot of lager. I love hoppy beers. I drink a lot of hoppy beers too. And I love like dark beers. So things that I think fit into like the language that we've kind of written through saison so far, we'll make those beers, which is abstract and probably not a real answer, but that's how I'm thinking about it right now.
Yeah, I like it. Something I heard you say on the Beer Temple recently, and I just wanted to like push it on you, not like I don't agree with you, but you made the comment that no. You said now's a good time to invest in your brewery, and I know there's a lot of like doom and gloom in craft beer with a lot of closures in the state or across the country.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess like, what did you mean when you said that?
I mean, it's easy for me to say because I don't already have a bunch of investors or a bank loan or anything like that. So it's obvious it's time for me to invest in my brewery. But I think it's also just like, if you make something that's really connecting with people, it's hard right now, but if you truly have a connection with your like customer base and your people and your like the people that come and support your business, you're gonna make it through the other side most likely and healthier. And unfortunately, there's gonna be a lot of breweries that close. And so if you're able to like reinvest in your brewery, to double down on the connection you have with people, keep making great beers, you're going to come out the other side and there's going to be a lot more people that are like, oh, I remember, we haven't been to Big Isle in a while because this other brewery opened down the street. Let's go check them out again. Like, oh, these guys are great. Like, they're so nice. And like all their beers are like exactly what they told us they were going to be. They're super underrated.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing where like, money's tough, interest rates are high. Like, I'm sure people aren't just handing out money for equity anymore. But if you can keep it not just monetarily, but emotionally, mentally, and physically keep investing in your brewery when it's the hardest to do it, or the most frustrating, or the most burnout, it's probably going to come around and be very beneficial in the relatively short term.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like just my vision of things because I'm drawn to the saisons, but I feel like a lot of the breweries that have been popping up recently have been kind of saison breweries because it's like starting a brewery right now is not the smartest thing to do in the world, but it does seem like you guys were able to start. Sundial was able to start. We were talking about Sway for a minute before we started recording, but broke off from Hacienda to do his thing, and it seems like those breweries that are able to differentiate themselves somehow and to stick out and have like a niche down. I mean, they're doing other styles too, but
yeah, I think there was a period of opening breweries where it was a cool thing to do, and that's over. Like, if you're opening a brewery right now, it's because you have something specific you think you want to say, or that you think people need to have, and there's a lot of IPAs out there, so it's unlikely that you're like, what, people need to have my version of an IPA because it's probably not that different. But there's a lot of people who believe in saisons and love saisons and there's a lot of space in saison to be like, hey, here's my version of this. Yeah. And it's important, and we're not trying to be, the playbook right now isn't that you have to be a 15,000 or 20,000 barrel a year regional brewery to be successful. You can make less than 1,000 barrels, and if you have the right setup, if you have the right location, if you have the right ability, you can be as successful as you need to be.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, when you think of saison breweries in Chicago, like there's you, Afterthought, Off Color, but I feel like all three of you are so vastly different from each other.
Yeah.
Like Afterthought's a little more acidic.
Yeah.
I'd say Off Color usually is more toned down. I mean, they do some like unique small stuff out of like just out of the mousetrap, but there's a space for everyone. And like you said, it's like for a vision for a thing, it's a lot different than like an IPA, like you said.
Yeah.
So I just to emphasize that from a local perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just ask you. I'm gonna jump into just the podcast, just like the Beer Temple podcast.
We're gonna
for a
start
minute.
the podcast now.
Yeah. No,
Great.
we're hitting record now. No, before I do that though, where can people get your beer? Like, what's the best way to find you? Kind of.
Our website's a great spot to go to. It's iswasbrewing.com, because you can order basically any of the beer that we've ever made that I still have in stock is available on that website for pickup at Beguile's Tap Room. We can't deliver it directly to people anymore, and we can't ship it, but you can come here and pick it up at Beguile. There's also like a store locator on there, so you can like kind of like go to that page and kind of scroll into where you live and click on spots around there. If you do see something close to you that's on there, I would suggest calling them to make sure they have it, because not every place gets everything we make. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are probably two best. I mean, Beer Temple always has some of our stuff.
Yeah, you guys you're really good about, since you do the deliveries yourself, you're really good about posting where like the stories about I'm delivering this to you.
I'm not sure how useful that is to people, but it's just something I've been doing since literally the first time, and so we're just gonna keep doing it.
Yeah. So about the Beer Temple podcast, you sort of like it was the Beer Temple Insiders Roundtable.
Yeah.
And after the pandemic started loosening up in 2021, you started taking more of a role as a co-host on it. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? Like, did Chris approach you to do it, or?
Yeah. So like we had always, like, even from the inception of that show, Chris and I had been talking, like, that when it was the Insiders Roundtable, we had been talking about like what that show is and because at the time almost all beer media was just reviews. Mm-hmm. Even and especially the podcast. They're like, we're gonna drink this beer and we're gonna, say what it tastes like, which is fine, but it's a weird medium to do it through. It's not, you can't even see what the beer looks like, and beer isn't like food where even if you see it, you're like, oh, that looks great. It's like, it's just, they look mostly the same.
Yeah. So
it was more, he wanted to make a show that was different and had some different angle, and what he was really wanted to do was that, like, we have these conversations at bars about what's going on in the industry, and Edmar just started that radio station, so he's like, I want to have that. I want to get my people I know in the beer industry to come on and talk about what's happening in the beer industry, and he did that every week for like years. Yeah, every Thursday, and then it slowed down. We couldn't go into the studio at Lumpen Radio anymore because of the pandemic, and he's just so busy with like the business as it is that he's like, I can't just do all this. When I just show up and like have the topics ready, that's one thing, but then I have to like figure out what equipment to buy and all that. He stopped doing it for a while. We did a couple on Zoom, which was funny, and just like, what are we doing? And then when the pandemic kind of ended, he was like, well, we're gonna do it here, and I want you to come on and co-host if you want. I was like, yeah, but we can't just do roundtables anymore. And I think he also had that idea. It wasn't like I was like, no, we got to change your show. It's more like he's like, yeah, we should do something else too. Yeah. Because there just wasn't as much news. Like when breweries were getting bought every like 2 weeks, we could talk about that for 2 hours, Yeah. But there just isn't as much breaking news that matters anymore. Even breweries getting bought right now, it's like, who cares? Yeah. So the original ideas was that we'll do like a roundtable on that feed every 3 to 4 weeks. And then the interstitial episodes would be about like kind of introducing you to the people we have on the show all the time, to get a little bit better idea of like who they are and why they might have the opinions they have when they come on the show. Mm-hmm. And then we've branched out and doing a bunch of other stuff. Like we do like a book club now. We do just like,
I just got mine in, by the way.
Nice. Yeah. I'm reading it too. It's a great book.
I haven't started reading it.
Just like wacky, like drafts that are just more like fun.
The movie nights are wacky.
Yeah. That's another one where we're like, let's see if this works, and we're not sure if it's working or not, but it's fun.
The style histories are cool. Yeah, you guys do that, and I mean, even though I felt like I could like sense the tension with between you and the saison guy?
Oh,
when he was like, "This is all a lie."
That was also tough because I literally had a migraine up until like I was late to that podcast because I get migraines sometimes, and I was basically having the tail end of a migraine during that show.
Yeah.
So it was not the best one for the saison episode to be, but whatever.
Yeah. So
We do our best.
No, it's great, and I think the rebrand of whatever you want to call it has been a success in my eyes, and it's fun to listen to.
It's been really fun, and like it's a free podcast with no ads right now, so it's like we just want to do things that are interesting to us, and hopefully people like listening to it.
Yeah.
And I think people will. There's good content on there. Really insightful people that are also very funny.
So I have just a couple random questions I was going to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite 90s Yankee?
Ooh, Bernie Williams.
Bernie Williams. Okay.
Yeah, Bernie Williams.
And then, so when you were a jazz guitarist or a guitarist, who
Yeah.
is like your inspiration? Are you like, you like Wes Montgomery, more like jazz, or do you like?
Yeah, I mean, Pat Metheny was my favorite jazz guitarist, and then Kurt Rosenwinkel was up there too.
I don't know Rosenwinkel, but
He's great. But I don't know. I don't really listen to that much of that anymore. That's such like technical brain, like heady brain music.
Yeah, I mean, I can listen to it and just like have it in the background, but I can imagine if it's like something you live for so long that it's.
Yeah, when I'm working, I mostly listen to instrumental music, but there's something about that type of jazz that it just feels like it's an exercise more than it is like an emotional expression for a lot of those people. They're the most technically proficient people, and I'm sure they feel very deeply like anyone does. But then you're just like, I don't know. There's also probably the way that I had to connect to it at a certain point was like figuring out if he's playing a Lydian scale or like which extent is that a sharp 9 or is that a flat what like
it's hard to turn that off
anymore. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't listen to that much of that. Like if the stuff that's replaced that in my head is like Tortoise.
Okay.
Or like
Jeff Parker's.
Yeah,
awesome.
that kind of stuff where it's like much less an extension of academic jazz than it is like
a vibe.
Yeah, totally, dude. And
His
like,
solo stuff is awesome.
He's sick. And like I joke with people, this is a vibes brewery. Like, like of course you have to know, like similarly, you have to know like a lot of technical things to produce the vibes.
Yeah.
But no one should like. I don't want anyone seeing the gears turning unless we're listening to a podcast where I go on for 2 hours about like the technicalities of Brettanomyces. But when you drink the beers, I don't want you to see like, he had this really high concept and that's why it's like I want you to just enjoy the beer. And then if you want to get into it, be like, that is cool that he has like that philosophy behind it, or like it was based off of this one weird ingredient that only one guy in Indiana makes. Like that's secondary to like just the beers being good vibes.
Yeah. All right, so we'll move on to the rapid fire questions, but just before that, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, this has been great.
All right, so 5 rapid fire questions.
Let's go.
Favorite beverage? Doesn't have to be alcoholic or anything.
Oh, I mean, is beer a category of beverage that counts?
Yeah, if you want to go specific.
It is genuinely saison.
Saison.
Yeah, or water.
Number 2, a song everyone should listen to.
Oh.
And this is I'm creating I already have it, but it's a playlist where I'm putting everyone's entry on. So it could be a song that's your favorite. It can be a song that you think you just want to put people on or whatever.
This might come across as really try hard, but Spanish Joint by D'Angelo, that song is incredible. And it's what we've been talking about. Sorry, this is not rapid fire anymore. I'm going.
No, you're good.
But it's another thing we've been talking about where if you listen to it, you're like, this is a vibe. This sounds awesome. This is so cool. And then when you learn about it, it's 2 people making all of the music. It's 3 people. It's Questlove plays drums, D'Angelo plays keyboards and sings, and then do you know Charlie Hunter? Charlie Hunter is this guy that plays. Now it's a 7-string guitar, but he used to play an 8-string guitar, and he would play bass lines and chords and lead all at the same time,
simultaneously.
So have you heard that song Spanish Joint by D'Angelo?
It's on Voodoo. It's on Voodoo. I probably have, but I didn't single it out.
Listen to it, and then listen to it again, and specifically think about how the bass line and all the guitar parts are being played by the same guy at the same time. It's not overdubbed. They're overdubbing on the drums, but he played all of that stuff and it doesn't matter. The vibe is so strong.
Yeah.
It's just cool to also be like, holy crap, this guy's incredible.
That's awesome. I'll definitely be checking it out and adding it to the playlist.
Sweet.
Number 3, favorite concert you've been to?
Ooh, Colin Stetson, who is a saxophone player. Do you know Colin Stetson?
I don't.
Have you ever seen the movie Hereditary?
I have not.
Okay.
I'm not a big movie or TV person.
He did the soundtrack for that, but he was in like Bon Iver. I think he was in Of Montreal. He was like the go-to kind of like indie rock sax player. But he started making this. I'm sorry, these are supposed to be rapid fire.
No, to be honest with you, I need to change the name because I feel like some of the best conversation of the whole time comes off of these answers because I just want to like. Yeah.
Cool. Well, he started making this solo music where it's just him playing typically like a bass saxophone, which is like a huge low saxophone, but he mics the sax in a way where, of course, him playing the saxophone is coming through, but he mics the pads of the saxophone and they act as like different drums, and he has a contact mic on his throat. And so he'll play the saxophone, the percussion of the clacking keys, and he's singing counter melodies because he circular breathes. It sounds very technical and like and nerdy, but it's like primal.
Is it kind of ambient then?
Kind of, yeah. It's like but it's very like it's very like I don't know. I don't know how to describe what I'm doing right now. I'm like doing like the worm in the air. Yeah, it's very rhythmic and like pushing and like throbbing almost. It's like really cool.
I'll check it out. There's a couple guys I can talk to you about it. I don't want to get it done, but there's a couple guys in LA that are doing a lot of cool like ambient type stuff. One of them plays the sax and the other one plays the bass. So
who are
is
they?
it Sam Wilkes and Sam Gendel?
Oh yeah, I love Sam Gendel.
Yeah,
he did an album with Pino Palladino and Blake Mills recently, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
That album rocks.
I love it. Yeah, I love that stuff. I have like all their albums, but it's something that a lot of their stuff's like hard to pair beer with because it's like obscure names.
Right.
So I don't always post it.
Yeah, that concert was nuts though because like I assumed that was when I was like. I'm not at peak, but pretty high, like music school nerd stuff of like he's using loops or he's doing something on these recordings, he's overdubbing, and then I went and saw the show and I'm like, he might still be using loops, and then he like almost knows that like nerds like me would be like, I don't trust it, so he would start speeding up and slowing down at parts of songs that like the album doesn't, just to be like, yeah, I'm not looping this is me doing all of it. And I was like, damn. The concert was probably only 35 minutes because he's so physically like expending his energy doing like 5 things at once. It's nuts.
Yeah, he's wild.
Yeah.
So number 4, favorite place you've had a drink.
Favorite place? Ooh. Hopleaf or Delilah's, to be honest. I think Delilah's is the best bar in the world. And I think Hopleaf is like my favorite place to be and drink. I went there yesterday to have for a meeting, and I'm going again today, depending on the weather, with my fiance.
Great beer, great food.
I met my fiance there on our first date, and then we had our engagement party there, so it's also got sentimental attachment now. Yeah,
nice. Yeah, no, I've some people are like, oh yeah, this wedding I went to, I had
that's
or
cool.
This vacation or whatever. So it's I was kind of guessing you were gonna say like Oberon or Blasi or something like that. But
those were very, very cool. Don't get me wrong.
But this has a special.
Yeah. And like I'm more of a creating depth than having singular peak experiences, right?
Yeah.
All the things that I've done and people I've been to Hopleaf with make it even more special than just like, damn, I was on the top of a mountain and that was cool. Like I've never done that, but like just my personality is more like things build over time than like big spikes.
We used to live in Andersonville, and so I would stop by there a lot. But now I haven't. I think I've been back one time since we moved to Portage Park. But now I get to the Beer Temple more often because I'm on that side of the city.
Yeah.
So
Beer Temple rocks too. I love the Beer Temple.
Yeah, it's weird how that stuff works. Like you never get to, even though it's like not even 10 miles, but it's like 30 minutes.
Right.
All right, number 5. What's your favorite, or what's your guilty pleasure for music?
For music?
Yeah.
John Mayer.
Hey.
Yeah, when I was growing up, and it's not even that guilty. When I was growing up, he grew up in the same town I grew up in, and I started playing guitar at 12, and he was like just getting big, and I found out my guitar teacher was his guitar teacher for a couple years, and I was like, oh, I got really into him, and then like recently this year I went back and re-listened to all the albums because I fell off at one point, and I was just like, oh, I understand why I fell off. Like the Yeehaw John Mayer is just not interesting to me at all, but like the earlier stuff. And then like some of the more recent stuff is a little like weirder and a little more hip hop inspired, or a little bit more like a little less like I moved to Montana and look at how I've changed, you know?
Yeah. I love his early stuff. I haven't listened to much of his new stuff, and I know This is something I've never even looked into because I'm not into jam bands for something I've never gotten into.
Yeah.
But I know he's doing like the Dead and Co stuff.
Yeah.
Now. Are you
It's
into
supposed
that?
to be great. No, I'm not a jam band person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried. I tried to get into like Fish and I just don't get it. And I don't do any drugs. Like alcohol and caffeine are the only things that really alter my state.
Yeah.
I'll just get too weird and paranoid.
I'm with you on that.
So like I think that's a helpful tool in understanding those bands a little more, and it just isn't my thing.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he's great. I've watched some videos of him do it. Sounds like he's doing a good job.
Ironically, people who are into it, I've been like, oh, what do you think about John Mayer being in it? Because I kind of feel like they're going to be like, oh, he's like, whatever. But everyone's like, no, he's legit.
Yeah.
Like,
he's had a crazy like career of like ebbing and flowing out of being like people should hate him, but then everyone's like, but he can really play the guitar.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, but he wrote that song. Like it's funny to watch, especially as like someone that like theoretically is from the place I'm from. Like I've never met that person. I don't know him at all, but it's like to think of him as like an actual human being first when I was getting into it, and like, oh, this is like, and then he blew up. It was it was wild. But yeah, I don't know if I have any other like actual like guilty pleasures. A lot of pleasures though.
Yeah, no, that's all good. And some people have guilted me.
What's your guilty pleasure?
My guilty pleasure. So my mom growing up was really into like, she was listening to country. So like 90s country, like Alan Jackson.
Sure.
I love that. And then I'd say middle school, high school, I was really into like pop punk, emo, punk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that's kind of like
when I get together with my friends from college now and we play music. Like last time I got together with my two of my friends I actually still play music with, we play like Ocean Avenue. We're not like busting out like giant steps.
Yeah.
We're like, now we're gonna play Ocean Avenue and Damn It by Blink-182.
Damn it was a jam.
Yeah.
I wish I would have learned to play guitar. I probably could start, but I never have been able to play an instrument. But I knew how to play Adam's Song by Blink-182. That was like the only thing I really knew how to play.
That song rocks.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit and answer all my questions.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This has been great.
All right. Well, and everybody, until next time, try some new beer and listen to some new music. Cheers.